Hi again, it's Naomi Nygaard here, and in this video I'm going to be specifically focusing on the 12-step modality, one might call it, or journey process, as a method of finding freedom around addictions and compulsions. And I guess some of my opinions are going to be coming in here a little bit as somebody who has been very connected to the 12-step process in my life, who found a real rudimentary lightening of my load and capacity to be able to find freedom from the numerous addictions and compulsions in my life. And also, as I've grown in my career as an internal family systems therapist and deepened my understanding of myself and listened more closely to what some of my clients have been telling me, that actually there is some little tweaks that ideally, if I ruled the world, I would make to the 12-step, specifically the language. For me, as a process, as a method of transformation, essentially there is something extremely precious about the process. I find it a way of connecting with the deeper wisdom within ourselves, that kind, loving, open, expansive, and calm place that is literally untouched by anything terrible, bad that could possibly have happened in our lives, and untouched by our experiences of addiction or compulsion, and connecting with the source, that deep inner source that we have, that can show us what to do, how to find healing, can guide us from within to find our freedom. And also, for me, it's a process of finding what it is in our past that has been burdening us and lightening our load around this as well in some very helpful, simple methods, and connecting with the rest of life as well. So often, many of us have been in a place of isolation, actually, and felt very ashamed and cut off within our compulsion, within our cycle. And so this is about finding a way eventually within our process to bridge that gap and to come back into life and the connection with the rest of our human family and with ourselves and with our that mysterious, unnameable, no words to describe mystery that connects us all. So to illustrate some of what I mean, I'm going to jump over onto some slides again. And remember, these are my opinions that I'm sharing with you. It may be that you've had an experience of 12-step recovery. It may be that you haven't. It's very likely that your experience will be different, and honour that. I'm certainly not making sweeping statements on behalf of anyone at all. But it may also be that the content within this video does chime with you, and I'd be very curious to hear about that. So let's go over and share some slides. So firstly, I'm going to share a little bit more about what I believe is the process of finding freedom around addictions and compulsions. I'm very fond of this prayer. It's a prayer that I myself said out loud on my knees for many years when I was in early recovery in Overeaters Anonymous and then other fellowships afterwards. Relieve me from the bondage of self so I may better do thy will. So how else can we translate that? That's actually quite old-fashioned language. It meant a lot to me somehow without even really understanding it, and that's totally valid. Another way of looking at it might be, and this is more from the internal family systems frame, help me unblend so that I can be self-led. So unblend, well, I've been talking in the previous videos a little bit about parts of us, and they can get super blended. If we're standing at the refrigerator, gulping down food like there's no tomorrow, or gulping from a bottle, or any other thing that feels not in alignment with our hopes for ourselves, with our vision for health or happiness or freedom, then it's very likely that we're blended with a part of us, that protective part that I described in an earlier video. And to be self-led is to lead ourselves in our lives from the place of wisdom, from the place of clarity. And all those qualities I mentioned in the previous video are the qualities that can be at the forefront of our decision making and how we lead our lives and how we show up in our relationships. So this is just another little way of looking at that prayer. Help me unblend so that I can be self-led, so that I'm not taken over by parts of me that are compulsive, parts of me that are critical about myself or trying to get things under control, and so that I can make choices from that deeper place of wisdom. And really my life starts to unfold in some precious ways from there. So this integration of internal family systems and 12-step, which I'm so passionate about, brings together what in 12-step is called God, or at a certain point in the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book is referred to as the spirit of the universe or creative intelligence. So there's certainly no sort of putting forward the one word. We choose what word feels right for us. And what's called an internal family system self, our divine essence, our capacity to lead. So if you like, in 12-step recovery, there's more of an emphasis on God being something from the outside, or that mystery that I spoke of, that stillness being something that comes from the outside into our being. And then in IFS, it's more recognized as something that's inside our being that shines out into the world. And both are true. There's no kind of one way of looking at things, and you might experience that for yourself as well and have your own ideas about that. So these are just some different ideas relating to or pointing to perhaps similar essences. Why I love 12 steps. I believe it reduces shame, and I'm going to throw a little quote at you here. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. But the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. And I absolutely found this for myself, that actually that pivot for me, that first step into freedom was when I listened to a woman who had a very similar relationship with food and with drinking that I did. And she could speak for the feelings and the emotions and the experiences. And at the same time, I could sense that she had truly and viscerally overcome those experiences. And I was super curious. I wanted to find out more. I wanted her to share exactly what she'd done. And eventually she did. She shared it with me, and I could find the transformation that she herself had found. But I wouldn't have gone through those steps if it had come from some expert or some therapist that was just telling me what to do, probably because there was a part of me that believed it wasn't possible and that person could tell me what they wanted. But if they hadn't experienced what I had, or if they weren't up against the same experiences I did, then how could they possibly know? And so I want to take this moment to let you know that I well and truly am someone that has used both the 12 steps and internal family systems to find a sustainable and lasting true freedom from the different compulsions that I've been up against. And I say that because maybe there's a way in which hope, a healthy kind of hope, a sort of, yeah, if she can do it, like what's so special about her? Maybe I can. And that's something that in 12-step recovery has very much been utilized and gathered and brought to bear on the people that first come into the fellowships that are looking for hope, that are looking for guidance. And I think it's very potent. Healthy hope. I mentioned healthy hope. So I'm talking about a kind of, you know what, I can do this, like connecting to our aspiration rather than a kind of wishful thinking or sort of, one day, which can be not such a healthy hope, a sort of pining or wishing part of us that isn't really connected to that energy, that movement, that hope in motion, which can guide us into positive experiences and positive energy. So that really gets reinforced when we hear other people's experiences of recovery from specifically the type of addiction or compulsion that we might be up against. And sometimes it's even like the worse they've been, the worse of a pickle they've been in, and the more they've transformed, the more inspiring it can be for us. And sometimes we need to hear something. If we're not up against something really serious, we may need to hear someone that's had a more subtle journey, and it's whatever can help us identify and feel that possibility for freedom is in store for us as well. So I've mentioned other parts in the past, and it's true that we can have protectors that feel quite hopeless, that feel like, what, this is all nice to hear, but actually, is this possible for me? I've tried all these different things. Get real. This is just another merry-go-round of hope and hopelessness. And they don't even really, some of those parts don't even really appreciate us allowing us to experience the energy of hope, because they may feel like, I don't want this to be another roller coaster. I don't want you to get your hopes up and then have them dashed or feel disappointed. And it's those disappointed parts of us that may hint at younger parts that hold disappointment about other things in life that didn't work out or didn't feel as we would have loved them to be or as we needed them to be, that can help some of that energy relax when we truly stay connected to people that have experienced the kind of transformations that we ourselves would, in our heart of hearts, love to experience. Why else do I love the 12 steps? Well, many of us have parts that deny that this is a problem, and they can sometimes make excuses like, oh, this isn't really a big deal. This isn't really impacting on my life. It doesn't really affect me. It's just a little thing. Everyone does this, and often everyone does, right? A lot of the things we do to kind of numb out and relax are very common. And we may even hang out with people that do the same thing. So we may be reinforcing that idea as well. And feeling that we're normal is super important. And of course we are, because so many of us humans, almost everyone I know has something like this going on for them too. And all of that's really understandable, that parts would want to feel that this is no big deal. There's nothing that we need to really do here. We don't really need to put a lot of time into this. It doesn't really make any difference to our lives if we do or don't. But it's interesting that when we're around people that have had some really positive changes, that we can start to consider, wow, maybe my life would transform in some ways that I can't even imagine if I was to go through this process of change. It's like they start to get a little bit interested. And that can happen when we're surrounded by people that are really thriving, really having success in various areas, or finding their relationships transforming and finding themselves happier. Another thing is, I believe in the power of structure. That's why I've created these programs, because I think it can be really helpful to have step-by-step simple guides to take us through a process. And it helps us to focus on progression. It helps us to share what we've found with other people. That's, of course, if many of you have ever read the 12 steps as they're written kind of on the wall, as they were originally written, we know that step 12 is the final step, and that's the step where we share what we've experienced, and we bring our wisdom to bear and our experience to bear in service of someone who's right at the beginning of their journey. And this is probably my favorite step. It helps to bring a sense of being a valuable member of the human race. It helps to bring a sense of self-worth. We bring our unique flavor to that experience of sharing our journey with others. And it really helps to rebuild some self-worth that can get pretty battered and bruised in the process of being caught up in an addictive cycle or a compulsive cycle. I love that the 12 steps encourages the controlling parts of us, to like the ones that just want to get all this under control and manage it all and have been working hard, to let go of what they feel is the full burden of responsibility for stopping our addictive behaviour. And that is something that is in store for them and available for them in the 12-step process. It brings them relief when they've tried and failed many times over to get things under control for us. And it brings them some sense of rest and peace and surrender when they may feel exhausted, when they may feel discouraged at the task of helping us. So that's very much in store. through this process. I see addictions as attachment disorders, and I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean by that, because that's probably a bit of a therapist word, a sort of phrase to throw in there. I believe as a human being, we need to be connected to other people. We really need to find ourselves knitted into a community and feeling a part of that, whether we're a natural introvert or extrovert. It's a natural, very important human need to feel that we're part of the greater whole, and that we belong, and that we're accepted just for who we are. And if that's been jolted in any way in our lives, that can actually give rise to addictive, compulsive feelings. That shame or feeling of loneliness, isolation, can be the pain that we're distracting ourselves from. And that can have been in our lives, in our childhood, that those experiences happened and got remembered. Or they can be in our family lines, if parts of our family struggled with not feeling belonging in our culture or in their families. Those unresolved experiences of isolation can get passed down the line, and we can even feel like that when we didn't even have those direct experiences. And I've put here tradition 3, because tradition 3 in 12-step recovery is the only requirement for membership in that fellowship is the desire to stop doing that addictive behavior. There is no other requirement. We do not have to be any particular kind of person. We do not have to behave in any particular way. As long as we have that desire, and I'll just put here a little footnote, which is, as long as we have even one part of us that desires this freedom, that desires to stop doing this, and at first that might just be that manager part that wants us to get things in order, stop doing that thing. As long as we have even just that inkling of a desire, then we belong. And of course, we must have that desire if we find ourselves in a meeting or making a call to another member of that fellowship. So it's an important healing tradition for me, that tradition 3. The only requirement for membership, for belonging, is that desire to stop doing that thing. Of course, it's important for all parts of us to feel welcome as well, and I'm going to speak more about that both in this presentation but also later on in the programme. Regulate using others. So this speaks to this experience of belonging. So many of us have had an experience where we've become a little bit extreme in our lives. We've become either very restrictive and very disciplined, kind of rigid, if you like, in our behaviours, or we may be kind of much looser, a little bit rebellious, not really following any kind of routine, maybe being caught up in those patterns that we're talking about. So we can swing from one extreme to the other, and this happens when we get, often it happens when we get triggered by circumstances in our lives or by those internal parts of us that I've been mentioning. And it's other people that can help us regulate ourselves. Of course, this journey is about finding a way that we can find some balance and regulation for ourselves within. But regulating using other people can be super important, particularly at the beginning of our journey. Just to know that someone else cares and reaching out to them can be super important. And the 12-step movement knows this. They're wise to this. And there are some structures in place to help support that. And like I shared in a previous video, the 12-step process is one of unblending with some of our parts so that we realize we're more than those parts. And we can include them in our experience, but we don't have to be possessed by them. And connecting with that energy of self, which is our true selves, that deeper self, that's an infinite supply for us, and connecting with that in other people as well. And then unburdening what's been heavy for us, what's been keeping this cycle going. Tailored tools. So I very much needed some specific tools within the different fellowships that I've been in. So when I was in OA, it was really helpful for me to have a food plan, so that I knew that I was eating not too much, but not too much, but not enough, because my two habits had been under eating and overeating. So some balance was really helpful for me, and some practical guidance around that. Later, when I was in the money-focused fellowships, I found that I needed some help creating a spending plan so that I knew that I had a plan for my spending within certain categories, that I wasn't overspending, and I wasn't underspending, that I was spending money on pleasurable things and fun things and things that kept life really enjoyable, and not coming from a place of financial insecurity and restriction. And so there's that balance, that middle way. And for me, I needed the help within the fellowship that I was in to find some guidance in those areas that I'd found tricky. Also, I was in a fellowship to help me with my romantic relationships, and I got some specific guidance around dating, which was extremely helpful because it came from members that had gone through the process of recovery and understood the types of guidance and support and encouragement that might be really useful in some practical ways. So I love that about 12-step fellowship, that those tools are available to us for free, and the people there to help us to utilize those. And this thing about for free, I love it. It's a chance to connect in abundance at any time. We have an enormous resource there at our fingertips, and we don't have to pay for it, which to me, as someone that's recovered around financial experiences and maybe and probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to recover the way that I have if there had been a price tag on it, this is something that I kiss the ground and bless. And I love that part of the fellowships. I love the fact that it's great if we can offer money. Money's important to keep the fellowships going, but we're welcome with or without money. If we don't have it, then that's no closed door for us. I believe it's a valuable resource for therapists like me working in this field, and that actually when we can respect the process of someone recovering, it can be a powerful vehicle of change that goes completely compatible with a therapeutic journey. It can be tricky when people like sponsors that guide us through 12 steps and therapists don't feel aligned. And so I think it's important that we all come together as people that support other people with recovering lives, to know that this is all part of the same experience of helping that person lighten the load. And I can say that for myself, it's been really important to find those safe spaces where there isn't any conflict in the support that I'm receiving. So I think that there are some certain pitfalls, actually. Let me just go back a little bit and hide that slide. Not pitfalls that I feel are going to be obstructive to anybody if they want to engage in a 12-step process, but pitfalls that I believe can sometimes turn people away when they could actually really benefit from the help. And that's why basically I've been so passionate in creating this experience, the Freedom Steps, which brings together IFS and 12 steps, because I believe IFS has the capacity to be able to unlock the potency of the 12-step process by softening and expanding the language and having a different paradigm through which to see and experience some of the spiritual concepts within it. So let me go ahead and start to list some of these potential pitfalls that may be experienced in 12 steps. And I will just say, if you've not experienced a 12-step journey for yourself, and if you haven't experienced any of these pitfalls, no need to watch the rest of this video. You might be curious to watch it, but this is perhaps for people that have experienced some of those pitfalls or have some of these preconceptions and want to see how perhaps internal family systems could help soften some of that and allow the value that the 12-step journey can offer to be accessed. So basically, when some parts of us, I'm going to call them firefighters, those compulsive ones, the ones that have the protective job of reaching out for those things that we do, when they're not on board, recovery doesn't work. Essentially, it doesn't last. It's not sustainable. We can have those short bursts of change, but we really have to have all parts of us being on board, my opinion is, in order to start to find a lasting freedom. In 12-step recovery, we might hear someone just say to us, you just aren't ready, you're just not willing. But basically, I don't believe that we have to wait for God or some kind of idea of something out from the outside in, mysteriously intervening in our process in some magical way, like striking us ready. I believe that actually through the journey of internal family systems and through the process that's lying ahead of you now, you can allow yourself to get to know these not ready, not willing parts and flesh that out a little bit, get curious. What is it that they don't feel ready for? What are they afraid of? And connecting with those parts from your heart, from self, from your curious and open and patient and compassionate self. And that it doesn't have to stay in that stuck place, that part doesn't have to stay in that unwilling place. It can actually be heard within that and be witnessed within that. It doesn't need to make any changes, but just to be known and connect to you can be super healing for that part. And I don't believe that recovery, any real good recovery, sustainable recovery, is possible unless all parts of us really feel on board with it and want it to happen. Otherwise, we're just overriding those parts and kind of shutting them out or exiling them and not wanting to hear from them. And of course, it's other parts of us that do that. Fear and superstition. Now, this isn't really inherent in the 12 steps, but there's some language that can sometimes sneak in where the firefighters, those compulsive parts of us, can be viewed as evil villains, and they can say things like that they're the disease, or that they're not to be trusted. I've heard this being described: while you're in a meeting, your disease is doing push-ups in the parking lot. So that even kind of has me think of like some big burly brute, some bully really, that's ready to come and beat me up. And actually, maybe it's not okay for that compulsive part to be viewed through that lens. Maybe that's just some kind of idea that gets projected onto that part. And I'm sure that I wouldn't appreciate being seen that way. And I'm not saying that sometimes parts of us don't come on quite heavy with us, but inherently evil isn't something I agree parts are. I believe that they're much more helpful than that in their very essence. They actually are trying to help. And I'd love to connect with you about this. This is quite a deep topic. But essentially, I think if we are projecting these sorts of views onto our parts, then it's not really helpful. It's not really helpful for creating that inner trust and harmony that is required for a really relaxing and calm and easeful recovery journey ahead. So sponsors, sometimes when we're in 12-step recovery, we get a sponsor, and they obviously have unburdened exiles. So they have parts of them that are unhappy, and because of that they can get protective parts like managers who really love to control us, who might be getting bossy and opinionated, who might be trying to play God. And of course, if they're doing that to us or other people, they're doing it to themselves too. And I'm not saying that only sponsors have this issue. Therapists have this issue as well. You know, we're not perfect people. No one is. But it's good to know that that kind of thing can creep in. And I know some people have experienced difficulty with that in 12-step recovery and have shared that with me. And so I would put it in as a little point here that none of us are perfect, and we're all humans trying to do our best. Sometimes we get it wrong, and then we can create an upset that can jeopardize another person's ongoing recovery journey. So shame burden parts work the steps to get perfect. And I'm putting this in because it's something I've seen in other people, and it's something I experienced myself. I just wanted to get perfect and make everything go away. And I think I had some real past experiences in my family line around having to be pure and perfect and spiritual. And so I thought any kind of crossword to other people, or any kind of experience I'd had in my past that was less than positive for other people, was a terrible harm that I'd caused them. And I used the 12-step process to a little bit, well, going over the top and needlessly try to resolve some of the feelings that actually couldn't be resolved through getting perfect. It was a case of going to those deeper parts that felt not good enough, felt not spiritual, felt bad, and finding a way to help them relax and feel more connected to me and more forgiven, really, like accepted for exactly who they were. Not forgiven even, that suggests that they had done something wrong, but just seen and heard and witnessed. And actually that was more effective for me than going through some of the processes that I experienced in my first round through the steps. So the steps and tools, I believe, are insufficient to unburden certain exiles, and that's what I was just speaking for. Even if we're using the IFS-based journaling that I have been mentioning we will use, and also that I will be introducing in this process, I believe that sometimes IFS therapy is needed. And we can find for ourselves our truth within this, because I think the amount that we can do in our own journeys when we're connected to other people is actually immense. We can really make some great progress. And I think sometimes there just is a place for having an IFS therapist to help us on our journey of freedom. So I also believe that the 12 steps are a little bit insufficient in as much as they don't bring as much focus to our bodies. That's not spoken about in the literature much, if at all. And of course, reach out to me if you've got some quotes that go against this. I certainly haven't noticed too much of that. And I guess we've evolved in our understanding now that healing does happen through our bodies. It's a physical thing as well as a mental thing, as well as a focus thing. It's all of it together. And for me, I've needed a lot of connection with my body and with the parts of me, those deeper parts of hurt and pain that carry the triggers for some of the compulsions that I've had. And they've needed to feel that my awareness is with them in a physical way. Some of the language that's sprinkled throughout the 12-step literature to me feels a little harsh, like moral wrongs, shortcomings, harmed, selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, and also quite masculine, especially in the language describing self or higher power. He, Father, God. Even the concept of higher power rather than lower power seems to me quite imbalanced or single focus sometimes. Like, why not lower? Why not touching Mother Earth? Different ways of looking at things that can sometimes be a little bit restrictive or even feel unwelcome to parts of us, that can cringe with shame, that can be afraid of the language, that can feel that they're being attacked or dismissed. And then parts of us that get critical with us can even agree and think, yeah, we have done wrong. Yeah, we are selfish. And shame can then get kind of buried. And then what can happen is that parts of us that reach for those things, those soothing, escaping things, can get even more determined in their role. So some of the language might not work for you, you found, if you have gone through a 12-step journey. And also, I'm not so keen on identifying myself as an addictive part, like I'm an alcoholic, or for me it was I'm a compulsive overeater. And my disease, actually, I believe is a result of a cluster of parts. And I showed this in an early video where parts of us come together and kind of bat and ball off each other, or they're in a cycle together. It's not that I'm one part that is the alcoholic. I'm more myself than any of these parts. I'm more the awareness, the witness, the witnessing one that sees it all and contains it all. And I know it can be very helpful at the start when someone just feels like, oh, at last I've broken free from this blanket of denial that I am an alcoholic, for example, that I can say that, and that I can feel that not only can I be real about that, but I actually can say it without feeling shame. And so I think there's such a lot of value for being able to say that. And I think at some point it gets useful to move beyond that, not to necessarily say it indefinitely, because it can give us the message that we can't be free. And I truly believe that we really can. And for us, freedom might not mean that we ever drink again, for example, or that I, for example, ever eat certain things again. But freedom can be a true internal knowing that I'm greater than the sum of my parts, including my alcoholic cluster of parts. So this is another thing. I'm not like them comparing parts. IFS can be very helpful to identify and negotiate space from these parts. So sometimes we can experience these sorts of thoughts like, oh, I don't feel like I can really identify with people in this process. And it's not that this is a pitfall of the 12-step program. Of course, we're going to butt up against people in a whole fellowship of many different people that we don't like, or that we think, no, I'm not an alcoholic like that, or I was never on the streets, or it's never got that bad, or I've never done domestic violence, or it's not got that extreme, or things that we find distasteful and do not want to associate with. It can be really helpful to have support and awareness of parts of us that may be having these reactions, in order to find a way to stay connected with what it is we do identify with as we're going through the 12-step process. So I'm going to also mention, that was the end of the pitfalls for the 12-step process, but I'm going to mention my belief of a few pitfalls for internal family systems. And I would say at this point, this way may well be changing. This may well change over the next few years. And I hope it will. And I hope that I'll be part of that change. In fact, it's my mission to be part of that change. But for now, I think that sometimes only having IFS in our lives may not be enough for us to experience freedom. That's why I've created the freedom steps as well, because I feel like having a few different tools in our toolbox can be really, really helpful. And like I said, I trust IFS, and I believe wholeheartedly in its capacity to be able to heal us. And sometimes I feel that it doesn't have quite the infrastructure that we might need to help us heal. So let me go right ahead. I don't believe that weekly therapy is enough to create a quick and complete change. Of course, quick and complete change, is there any such thing? Everything is always a process. But I do believe that when we connect with a community of other people and see the changes that they're going through and have the support of connecting with them, that it can take our journey into a whole new level. It can be a catalyst. And so expecting ourselves to make huge leaps and bounds within an addiction and compulsion, particularly if it's been something that we've been up against for a long time, may not be enough. And it can be extremely helpful, and it may not be enough for you. For me, it wasn't. So I needed the both. I needed all the things, all the tools. We can isolate when it comes to true intimacy, and so that sort of hints at that top one, that weekly therapy sometimes is not enough. It's great if we're connecting to a therapist. That's a great start, and it can be useful to connect with a group as well. Hence my passion about the combination of IFS with a group experience around recovery, and my passion for creating these programs where people can connect together on the journey. So far, like I said about infrastructure, there isn't an addiction recovery community that allows for easy access to ways to connect whenever we might need that, whenever we feel like, if we don't connect to other people, if we don't feel a little boost of that hope and that connectedness, our firefighter might just step in and pick up that bottle or that spliff or whatever it is that we do. So far, there isn't that infrastructure, and why would there be? IFS is quite young. It's about 30 to 40 years old, where 12-step recovery is almost 100 years old. So there's a ways to go, but I believe that will happen in time. And some protectors do stay in role. This is my experience, even after parts of us unburden. So due to the momentum of what's been carried in our systems, the level of pain or the level of trauma or difficulty, or things in our past that have been traumatic, like world wars that our ancestors experienced, famines, immigration, etc. Those levels of difficulty and burden can mean that parts of us are really in such a momentum with doing our addictive behaviour. They can be very much in the flow of it. And it means that actually sometimes, I believe, being connected to a community and having structure around that, especially in early recovery, can be super helpful. And like I said, like I've been reiterating in this slide, sometimes just seeing a weekly therapist, whether it's IFS or otherwise, doesn't quite cut it in terms of really finding ourselves making leaps and bounds in getting free. And by the way, you might have a contrary experience to this, and I'm delighted if you have. I'd love to hear from you with more details about that. And if you let me know, I'll adjust the slide and re-record this video. And this speaks to the same point I've just made. I call it legacy and legacy burdening, that we've really, as a human race, been through the ringer. And as a collective family, we've been through the ringer. So there's a lot that we share in terms of pain that is a bit too much for us to cope with, and that parts of us need to escape from. And I believe that it really does take sometimes some radical shifts as a human family to come to a place where we're really releasing some of that pain and hurt and shame. And that's why I think fellowships are so important, because or ways of being in fellowship or community can be really important when it comes to healing addiction and compulsion, because we can really get and see that this is something that so many of us are up against, like more people than not, many more people than not in my experience. And it absolutely isn't a moral failing. And I think that's a real service that Alcoholics Anonymous did, to move away from this paradigm of that alcoholism means that there's something wrong with us, there's something evil with us, that we're not good enough, that we're hopeless in some ways, and moving towards a sense that this is something that we struggle with because it's not, and it's not our fault, and there's a real way that we can move through this, and we can actually transform it into something that's essentially going to be extremely beneficial, not just to us, but to the people around us. And maybe there's a ways to go in other areas as well, which still feel, to me, I sense that there are these other areas are lagging behind, and we can still judge them as morally wrong or just heinous, and not want to look them in the face or laugh at them even as a human family. And to make some of these shifts in our collective awareness of these particular addictions or compulsions, I believe we need to be connected to other people and strengthen numbers in a way as we start to change our mindset about these things. So I'm going to stop the share. Maybe some of these things that I've presented in this video are going to be tricky for you. They are my own opinions, and I would love to hear your opinions, particularly if they're contrary to that. I always love to talk about this with other people, and I love to develop my ideas in response to the feedback that you give. So I openly invite that. And I hope this has been helpful for you, and that we will connect very soon. And I look forward to seeing you in the Freedom Steps journey ahead.